Imagine a hidden courtyard in 1936 Tallinn, where the walls themselves are made of glowing amber worth a king's ransom. Tonight, Russian millionaire Karl Ivanovich will unveil the lost Romanov Fabergé egg, and 30 seconds later, he will be choking on cyanide in front of everyone. Hercule Poirot, on holiday, is now trapped in a palace of suspects. The beautiful, drugged wife who inherits millions, the stiff captain hiding forged papers, the playboy nephew cut from the will, the devoted secretary accused of theft, and an amber egg that hides a deadly secret no one was meant to see. One of them chipped the priceless treasure for a keepsake. When the truth was about to be exposed, they poisoned the Kümmel to silence the man forever, who turned love into murder. Watch till the end, because in the amber courtyard, even the walls have eyes. Chapter 1. An Unexpected Summons. Hercule. Poirot stood on the deck of the ferry as it nosed into Tallinn's harbor, his gloved hands resting lightly on the rail, his eyes narrowed against the cold Baltic wind that whipped at the points of his magnificently waxed mustaches. It was November, and the light had already begun its brief northern day. The low sun struck the medieval towers of the lower town and turned their red roofs thaly to blood. Poirot was not pleased. He had permitted himself a very small holiday. After the affair of the Plymouth Express, which had been entre nous, excessively trying to the little gray cells, he had felt the need of repose. Helsinki had offered clean air, excellent saunas, and the admirable discipline of the Finns. From there he had intended no more than a quiet crossing to Estonia, a day or two wandering the crooked lanes of Tallinn, perhaps the purchase of a modest amber tie-pin, nothing more strenuous. Yet here he was, summoned like a junior clerk. He drew the telegram from the pocket of his perfectly cut overcoat and read it again, though he knew every word by heart. Come at once, stop matter greatest delicacy concerning. Unique amber collection, stop your discretion, indispensable, stop staying. Vane Street, 12, stop K. Ivanovich. The message had reached him at the Hotel Kemp in Helsinki, delivered by a boy whose ears were scarlet with cold. Poirot had considered refusing. One did not, after all, dance attendance merely because an acquaintance snapped his fingers. But the name, Karl Ivanovich, had stirred memory. They had met in 1916 in Petrograd, during that curious interlude when Poirot, a refugee from Belgium, had served with the Belgian police attached to the Russian forces. Ivanovich had been a young officer then, elegant, amused, already obsessed with amber. The tears of the sun, he had called it. After the revolution, he had vanished, like so many others. Rumor placed him in Paris, in Riga, in Shanghai, and now, apparently, in Tallinn, rich and in need of Hercule Poirot. Poirot folded the flimsy paper with precision and replaced it in his pocket. Vanity, he reflected with a small, complacent sigh, was a powerful force, stronger than curiosity, almost as strong as fear. The ferry docked. Porters shouted in Estonian and Russian. Poirot descended the gangway with the neat, mincing steps that concealed a surprising firmness, his galoshes gleaming, his Homburg hat tilted at exactly the correct angle against the wind. A motor car was waiting, surprisingly a Rolls-Royce Phantom Third, its brasswork dazzling despite the gray day. The chauffeur, a tall Estonian with the face of a medieval stone saint, saluted and opened the door. Monsieur Poirot, Monsieur Ivanovich sends his compliments and begs you will come at once to Vane Street. Poirot inclined his head and entered. The car slid forward through narrow streets where the ancient houses leaned together like conspirators, their stepped gables sharp outlined against the sky. Here and there a church spire pierced the clouds. Somewhere bells tolled with the mournful persistence of the north. As they climbed toward the upper town, Tumpea, the chauffeur spoke for the first time. "The house of Monsieur Ivanovich is very old, sir, from the time of the Hanseatic merchants. You will see." Poirot, who disliked unnecessary conversation while observing, merely murmured, "Indeed." They passed beneath an archway, turned into a cobbled lane so narrow that the wings of the rolls barely cleared the walls, and stopped before a tall, severe facade of gray stone. A single lantern burned above the door. Beneath it, a brass plate, K. Ivanovich. The door opened before the chauffeur could knock. A butler, massive, impassive, dressed in old-fashioned livery, bowed. "This way, if you please, Monsieur Poirot. The master is expecting you." Poirot surrendered his hat, coat, and stick with the air of a man bestowing treasures, and followed the butler across a vaulted hall where tapestries of hunting scenes hung in the dimness. A staircase curved upward, its banisters carved with grotesque faces, but the butler did not lead him up. Instead, he opened a door at the rear of the hall, and Poirot stepped into the amber courtyard. He stopped involuntarily. Mon Dieu, it was magnificent. The courtyard was not large, perhaps 30 feet square, but every inch of wall, from flagstoned floor to the glass roof high above, was lined with amber. Panels of it, thin as parchment, glowed with trapped sunlight, golden yellow, fiery red, cloudy white, deep cognac. In one slab, an entire insect, prehistoric and perfect, hung suspended like a jewel. Light filtered through the translucent walls and turned the air itself to warm honey. At the center stood a fountain. Its basin was carved from a single piece of amber, the size of a small table, and the water that rose and fell within it seemed to burn with inner fire. Poirot drew a long breath. "Superb," he said softly. "Superb and unique." From the shadows at the far end, a figure emerged, large, bearded, wrapped in a dressing gown of heavy silk. Karl Ivanovich had grown stout. The beard was now iron gray, but the eyes were the same, bright, restless, amused. "My dear Poirot," he cried, advancing with outstretched hands, "you have come. I knew you would not fail me." Poirot permitted his hands to be seized and wrung. "It is many years, mon ami." "Too many, too many. Come, sit. You will take a glass of tea? Or something stronger? No, I remember. You prefer your tisane, or perhaps a small glass of sirop de cassis." Ivanovich laughed loudly, as a man does when he is not entirely at ease. "Everything is prepared, but first, admire. Is it not the most beautiful room in Europe?" Poirot seated himself on a cushioned bench that was itself inlaid with amber tesserae. "It is without equal," he said truthfully. Ivanovich sat opposite, rubbing his hands together. "I have spent 25 years, Poirot, 25 years and a fortune. Amber from the Samland coast, from the mines at Palmnicken before the war, pieces smuggled out of Russia itself, museum pieces, you understand. And tomorrow," his voice dropped to a triumphant whisper, "tomorrow, I complete the collection. Tomorrow I unveil the Romanov egg." Poirot's eyebrows rose delicately. The amber Fabergé? It was believed lost. It was believed many things. Ivanovich leaned forward, eyes glittering. "But it is here, in my safe. Tomorrow a few connoisseurs will come. Quietly, you understand. And they will see it. And they will pay. Oh, such prices, my friend." He laughed again, but Poirot noticed that the laughter did not reach his eyes. "And why?" asked Poirot gently. "Have you sent for Hercule Poirot?" The laughter stopped abruptly. "Because," said Ivanovitch, and now his voice was low, almost fearful, "someone wishes to prevent tomorrow's unveiling. Someone in this house wishes me dead." Chapter 2. The House on Veni Street. Poirot regarded his host with the polite attention he reserved for those who were about to make fools of themselves. Ivanovitch paced the amber-lit floor like a bear in a cage, the silk of his dressing gown whispering against the flagstones. "Dead," Poirot repeated softly. "That is a serious word, monsieur." "Serious?" Ivanovitch halted and flung out his arms so that the wide sleeves flapped. "3 times in a fortnight someone has tried to make the word unnecessary. First my motor car. The brakes failed on the hill to Tompeia. Juhan swears the cable was cut. Then the chandelier in my study, its chain sawn half through. It fell while I sat beneath it. And last week?" He lowered his voice dramatically. "Poison in my vodka. Only the merest trace, or I would not be here boring you with my troubles." Poirot's mustaches twitched. "You kept the vodka." "Naturally. The police have it." They shrug. "Accident," they say. "Coincidence." Bah, I know murder when it looks me in the face. And the motive? Ivanovitch spread his hands. "Money, always money. I am rich, Poirot, obscenely rich. And tomorrow night I become richer still. When the Romanov egg is unveiled, certain gentlemen will pay fortunes for a single viewing. One has already offered £50,000 merely for first refusal." He leaned closer, breath smelling faintly of kummel and fear. "But someone in this house does not wish the unveiling to take place. Someone who would profit by my death before the safe is opened tomorrow." Poirot permitted himself a delicate sigh. "You will present me, perhaps, to the members of your household." Ivanovitch brightened as though someone had turned up the wick of a lamp. At once! Come, we will take tea in the winter salon. Everyone is there." He seized Poirot's arm with proprietary enthusiasm and propelled him through an arched doorway into a long, low room, whose windows looked out upon a snowy garden. A fire of pine logs blazed in a porcelain stove. Samovar hissed gently on a side table. Around it, like birds on precarious perches, sat the inhabitants of the house. They rose as Ivanovitch entered, a small flurry of movement, and murmured greetings. "Allow me," said Ivanovitch, beaming, "to present the greatest detective in Europe, Monsieur Hercule Poirot. He honors us with his presence. Poirot, my wife, Lydia Ivanovna." The woman who came forward was perhaps 35, though suffering had etched delicate lines about her eyes and mouth that made her seem both younger and immeasurably older. She had the pale, perfect skin of the north, and hair the color of ripe wheat coiled in heavy braids about her head. Her gown was black velvet, severe, almost conventual, and at her throat she wore a single amber pendant that caught in silver filigree. She extended a hand as cold as the snow outside. "I am enchanted, monsieur," she said in French, as pure as Poirot's own. Her voice was low, musical, with the faintest trace of sadness. "My husband speaks often of you." "Madame." Poirot bowed over the hand with exquisite correctness. He noticed that her fingers trembled slightly, and that the pupils of her gray eyes were very wide, as though she had recently taken a sedative. "And this," continued Ivanovitch, is my partner in business, Captain Eric Tam." The captain clicked his heels with military smartness. He was tall, perhaps 50, with a ramrod back and a face carved from Estonian granite. His mustache was trimmed with mathematical precision. His eyes were the pale blue of a winter sea. He wore a dark suit of excellent cut, but somehow it looked like uniform on him. "Honored," he said in clipped tones that suggested the honor was entirely on Poirot's side. "Captain Tam served with the Estonian Legion," Ivanovich explained. "A hero of the War of Independence. Now he manages the practical side of our amber trade, shipping, customs, those dull matters that bore me." The captain gave the faintest inclination of the head, neither confirming nor denying heroism. Ivanovich moved on. "Miss Helena Roos, my secretary and the guardian angel of my correspondence." Miss Roos was small, 26 or 27, with neat brown hair and eyes the color of rain-washed violets. She wore a gray wool dress that aspired to severity but could not quite achieve it. There was something soft and defenseless about her. When she shook Poirot's hand, her own was hot and fluttered like a bird. "I have read of your cases, Monsieur Poirot," she said breathlessly. "The ABC murders. It was brilliant. You are too kind, mademoiselle. And here, my nephew, Paul Ivanovich." Paul lounged against the mantelpiece, a cigarette dangling from long, artistic fingers. He was 28 or 30, handsome in the slightly overripe Russian fashion, with his uncle's dark eyes but none of the older man's vitality. His evening clothes were beautifully cut but faintly shabby at the cuffs. His smile was charming and entirely meaningless. "Uncle Karl flatters me by keeping me about the place," he drawled in English. "I am the ornamental branch of the family, you understand. I spend my days losing money at cards and my nights trying to borrow it back." Ivanovich laughed indulgently. "Paul is a rascal, but he is blood." Lastly, an ancient lady in bombazine and jet who had not risen from her chair by the fire. Her face was a network of fine wrinkles. Iron-gray hair was scraped back into a bun, so tight it seemed to stretch the very skin of her forehead. Steel spectacles glinted on a beak-like nose. "Fräulein Weber," said Ivanovich with rather less enthusiasm. "Companion to my wife since her childhood in Riga. She honors us still with her presence." The old woman inclined her head with the stiffness of a marionette. "I do not honor," she said in harsh German. "I remain because duty demands it, and because certain promises were made." Ivanovich's smile became fixed. "Yes, yes, Fräulein, we are all grateful." Servants glided in with tea, thin slices of lemon floating in glasses, black bread, smoked salmon, tiny pastries filled with reindeer meat. Conversation remained determinedly light. The severity of the winter, the excellence of Tallinn's new concert hall, the scandalous price of Russian caviar, since the Bolsheviks had ruined everything. Poirot sipped his tea and observed. Lydia Ivanovich sat very straight, hands folded in her lap, speaking only when addressed. When her husband's booming voice filled the room, she seemed to retreat further into herself, like a flower closing at dusk. Captain Tam drank his tea in silence, eyes flicking occasionally toward Lydia, with an expression Poirot could not quite read. Concern, perhaps, or something warmer. Helena Roos darted nervous glances at Paul whenever she thought no one noticed. Paul noticed everything and was amused. Fräulein Weber knitted with ferocious concentration, needles clicking like impatient teeth. Paul himself drank rather more vodka than tea, and his laughter grew fractionally louder with each glass. At length, Ivanovitch clapped his hands. "Enough of this sitting. Poirot, you will dine with us? Excellent. We keep Moscow hours. Dinner at 9. In the meantime, Juhan will show you to your room. Rest, my friend. Tonight you are guest. Tomorrow." His face darkened momentarily. "Tomorrow we unmask a murderer." Juhan, the massive butler, materialized as though summoned by telepathy. He led Poirot up the carved staircase to a guest chamber that overlooked the amber courtyard. The room was paneled in dark oak. A fire burned cheerfully. On the vast bed lay a dressing gown of quilted silk clearly intended for Poirot's use. Left alone, Poirot removed his coat, smoothed his mustaches before the glass, and permitted himself a small sigh of satisfaction. The household was exactly as he liked them, rich, unhappy, and lying through their very eyelashes. He moved to the window. Snow had begun to fall, large lazy flakes that melted as they touched the warm glass roof of the courtyard below. The amber walls glowed defiantly against the dark. "Somewhere in this house," thought Hercule Poirot, "is a person who has tried 3 times to kill, and who will almost certainly try again." He rubbed his hands together with anticipation that was only partly civilized. The game, as his English friends said, was afoot. Chapter 3. Death Among the Amber. The day passed in a hush of snow and suspicion. Poirot breakfasted alone in his room, served by the silent Juhan. Excellent coffee, black bread still warm from the oven, a sliver of smoked eel that melted on the tongue. Through the window he watched the courtyard below, where servants swept the flagstones and arranged candles in amber sconces that had not been lit for years. The preparations were meticulous, almost ritualistic. Ivanovitch was taking no chances with his triumph. At noon, Poirot descended and found his host in the study, a room lined with glass cabinets where fragments of amber glowed like captured suns. Ivanovitch was pacing, a bear disturbed in hibernation. "You have slept well?" he boomed, though his eyes were ringed with fatigue. "Admirably, merci. And you?" Ivanovitch waved the question away. "I do not sleep, I think. I plan. Tonight, Poirot. Tonight everything must be perfect." He unlocked a small wall safe concealed behind an icon of St. Nicholas and drew out a leather case. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay the Romanov egg. Even Poirot, who was not easily impressed by mere objects, caught his breath. It was perhaps 4 inches high, fashioned entirely of clouded Baltic amber, so translucent that the candlelight passed through it as through honey. Within the amber, suspended as though floating, was a miniature golden eagle, worked in gold and tiny diamonds for eyes. Around the circumference ran a band of imperial purple enamel, bearing the double-headed eagle of the Romanovs. It was exquisite, heartbreaking, a relic of a world that had died in blood and snow. "Beautiful," Poirot murmured. Ivanovitch's face softened. "More than beautiful, sacred. The Tsar himself commissioned it for his mother in 1916. Fabergé's workshop smuggled it out during the Revolution. It has passed through many hands, some honest, most not, until it reached mine." He closed the case with reverence. "Tonight 10 connoisseurs will come. They will see it, they will weep, and they will pay." Poirot's eyes rested thoughtfully on the safe. "You are certain the attempts on your life are connected to this egg?" "What else?" Someone wishes to prevent the sale. Someone who believes that with me, dead, the egg will vanish again into the shadows, and perhaps into their own pocket. Yet you proceed. Ivanovich laughed, a great bark. I am Russian, my friend. We are stubborn, and besides, his voice dropped. I have you. The day wore on. Poirot walked in the snowy streets of the upper town, past the great cathedral of Alexander Nevsky with its onion domes heavy with snow, past the pink Tumpia castle, where the Estonian parliament now sat. He bought a small amber brooch shaped like a ship for his secretary, Miss Lemon, who collected such trifles. He lunched modestly at a cafe in Raikoja Platz, watching the world hurry past beneath medieval gables. But his mind was in Veni Street, turning over the little he had observed. Lydia Ivanovich, pale, withdrawn, drugged with something to still her nerves. Captain Tam, watchful, correct, with the disciplined stillness of a man who has seen too many comrades die. Paul, cynical, extravagant, desperate beneath the laughter. Helena Roos, timid, infatuated, hiding something behind those rain-colored eyes. Fräulein Weber, venomous, knitting hatred into every stitch, and the servants, silent as icons. At 5 o'clock, he returned to find the house transformed. Extra footmen in borrowed livery, polished silver, flowers, forced lilies, and hothouse roses filled the air with incongruous summer sweetness. The guests began to arrive at 9. A stout Latvian banker with his jealous wife, a thin Swedish countess wrapped in sables, 2 discreet gentlemen from Berlin who spoke only German and money, a white Russian prince fallen on hard times, and finally, late and apologetic, Herr Müller, a Hamburg dealer whose reputation for honesty was matched only by his passion for amber. Dinner was served in the long winter salon, zakuski of caviar and blini, clear borscht shimmering ruby in crystal bowls, sterlet in champagne sauce, reindeer steak with rowanberry jelly, and for dessert a towering kulebiaka still steaming from the oven. The conversation was brilliant, brittle, multilingual. Ivanovich dominated it, flushed with vodka and anticipation, telling stories of czars and smugglers and lost treasures. Lydia sat at the foot of the table like a ghost at her own feast. Paul drank steadily. Captain Tam carved the reindeer with military precision. Poirot, seated between the Swedish countess and Herr Müller, listened more than he spoke. He noted how Lydia's hand shook when her husband's voice rose, how Helena Roos spilled wine and blushed crimson when Paul teased her, how Fräulein Weber's lips moved silently. Prayers or curses, one could not tell. At 10:30, Ivanovich rose, glass in hand. "My friends," he proclaimed, "the hour has come. You have dined at my table. Now I offer you something no money has ever truly bought, beauty that breaks the heart. Come." They followed him like pilgrims through the arched door into the amber courtyard. The transformation was complete. Hundreds of candles flickered in sconces of carved amber. The walls seemed to breathe with golden light. At the center, on a pedestal draped in black velvet, stood the leather case. The fountain had been silenced. Its basin reflected the flames like a pool of molten metal. The guests formed a semicircle. Ivanovich waited until the last whisper died, then opened the case with deliberate slowness. Gasps, a soft "Ach Gott" from Herr Müller. Even the Latvian banker's wife forgot to be jealous. Ivanovich lifted the egg high. Light fractured through the amber, scattering tiny rainbows across every face. "To Russia, that was," he said quietly. and to the Russia that may yet be. He reached for the glass that Captain Tam, ever attentive, had filled from the crystal decanter of Kümmel that always stood ready on the sideboard. The captain handed it to him with a small bow. Ivanovich raised the glass higher. And to those who recognize true beauty, he drank deeply. Once, twice. The glass fell from his hand and shattered on the amber flagstones. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Ivanovich clutched at his throat. His eyes bulged, his face congested to purple. A terrible, strangled sound escaped him. He staggered, knocking over the pedestal. The Romanov egg rolled across the floor and came to rest against Poirot's perfectly polished shoe. Ivanovich crashed to his knees, clawing at his collar, veins standing out like cords on his neck. His mouth worked horribly, but no words came. Lydia screamed. Once, a high, tearing sound. Paul swore in Russian. Captain Tam stood frozen, his hand still outstretched as though offering the fatal glass. Ivanovich pitched forward across the amber basin, convulsed once, twice, and lay still. The courtyard that had glowed like paradise now stank of bitter almonds. Herr Müller was the first to speak, voice shaking. Cyanide, prussic acid, my God. Poirot knelt swiftly, felt for the pulse that was not there, then rose and looked slowly around the circle of horrified faces. Mesdames et messieurs, he said quietly, we have among us a murderer. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and relentless, upon the ancient roofs of Tallinn. Chapter 4. The Circle of Suspects. The snow had ceased by the time Inspector Cook arrived, but the night air struck cold as a blade when the great door opened to admit him. He was tall, barely 30, with the fair hair and intransigent blue eyes of the coastal Estonians, and he wore his uniform as though it had been tailored in Helsinki, correct, modern, a trifle self-conscious. 2 constables followed, stamping snow from their boots, and behind them a police surgeon carrying the inevitable black bag. Poirot had already taken quiet command of the courtyard. The guests had been shepherded into the winter salon under the watchful eye of Johann, who seemed to have appointed himself custodian of order. Candles still burned, the amber walls still glowed with their treacherous beauty, but the fountain basin now held something darker than reflected light. Ivanovich's blood, where he had bitten his tongue in the final convulsion. Inspector Cook surveyed the scene, then turned to Poirot with the wary courtesy of a young man who has heard too many stories. Monsieur Poirot, your reputation has reached even Tallinn. I am told you were present. Alas, yes, and powerless to prevent. Poirot inclined his head modestly. The poison was in the Kümmel, prussic acid, administered in massive dose, death within minutes. The inspector knelt briefly by the body, then rose and sniffed the shattered glass. Bitter almonds, unmistakable. He gestured to the sideboard where the crystal decanter stood 3/4 full, its silver label glinting. Kümmel, Riga. This one? The same. Your surgeon will confirm, but there is enough hydrocyanic acid in that decanter to kill a regiment. Cook's face hardened. He spoke rapid Estonian to his men. One began photographing the scene with a bulky Graflex, while the surgeon made preliminary examinations. Then the inspector turned back to Poirot. The house is sealed. No one leaves. I understand there were guests? 10, besides the household. Connoisseurs, collectors, dealers. They arrived for the unveiling of a certain Fabergé egg. Poirot indicated the Romanov egg, now safely in his own pocket. Evidence, after all, must be protected. They are innocent of everything except greed, I fancy. The poison was added earlier. Any of them might have wandered past the sideboard during dinner, but none had motive to kill Monsieur Ivanovitch. Quite the reverse. They wished him alive long enough to sell. Cook nodded slowly, accepting the logic with the relief of a man who prefers his murders domestic. Then we begin with the household. He established himself in Ivanovitch's study, a severe room smelling of tobacco, amber dust, and old ledgers. One by one they came, pale, composed, or trembling, according to temperament. First, Lydia Ivanovna. She entered like a sleepwalker, the black velvet gown now, seeming a dress of mourning anticipated. She sat where the inspector indicated, hands folded tightly to still their shaking. "Your husband had enemies, madame?" "Many," she said in her low, musical voice. "He was not a gentleman, but enemies who would kill." She lifted her shoulders in a gesture of helplessness. "I have been his wife for 8 years. I inherit everything, the house, the collection, the business. You will say that is motive." "It is noted," Cook said dryly. "I took Veronal for my nerves," she continued, anticipating the question. "After dinner I went to my room for perhaps 20 minutes. Katya brought me a glass of hot milk. Then I returned to the courtyard." "Alone?" "Quite alone." She was excused. As she passed Poirot in the doorway, she paused. "You understand morphine, monsieur? No? Then you do not understand me." Captain Eric Tam entered next, heels clicking, posture faultless. He denied enmity with crisp, military precision. "Ivanovitch was my partner for 6 years. We disagreed, often violently, but I am Estonian. We do not poison. We shoot cleanly." Poirot, seated quietly in the corner, permitted himself a small smile. The captain's eyes flicked toward him, acknowledging the presence of a fellow professional. "Yet this afternoon," Poirot said gently, "Monsieur Ivanovitch discovered something displeasing in the partnership accounts, n'est-ce pas?" Tam's jaw tightened. "He accused me of forging his signature on certain bills of exchange. Absurd. The matter would have been settled tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Cook repeated, "when he might have gone to the police." "I had nothing to fear." His alibi was rigid. After dinner he had been in the library with the Swedish countess discussing Baltic shipping rates. The countess, flustered but emphatic, later confirmed it. Paul Ivanovitch sauntered in smelling of vodka and defiance. "Of course I'm delighted the old man's dead," he said cheerfully. "He changed his will yesterday, cut me off without a kopeck, said I was a wastrel. Me, his only blood relative." He laughed, but the laughter cracked in the middle. "Still, I didn't kill him. I was losing spectacularly at chemin de fer with Prince Dolgoruki in the small salon. Ask him. He won 3,000 krone off me." The prince, when questioned, remembered the sum with nostalgic pleasure. Helena Roos came next, eyes red from weeping. She twisted a handkerchief into knots. "This morning he dismissed me," she whispered. 5 years I have served him, catalogued every piece of amber, answered every letter, forgiven every rudeness. And today he called me a thief because a tiny fragment of raw amber went missing from his work table. I was to leave tomorrow with 1 month's wages. "Where were you after dinner, Fräulein?" "In my office, typing letters of dismissal. For myself." A ghost of humor touched her lips. "No. One saw me. I wished to be alone." Fräulein Weber stumped in, knitting needles protruding from her reticule like daggers. She wasted no time on civilities. "He robbed me," she spat. "Every mark I saved from 30 years teaching, he invested in his precious amber. All gone. He promised to make restitution after tonight's sale. Now he is dead, and I am penniless." Her alibi was contemptuous. "I sat in the winter salon knitting. The Latvian banker's wife admired my pattern. She will tell you." The woman did, with enthusiasm for the intricate lace. The servants followed. Johann, the butler, stood massive and expressionless. I served dinner. Then I was in the pantry with Katya preparing coffee. We were together the entire time. Katya, a pretty Estonian girl with frightened eyes, confirmed it, blushing. Finally, Herr Müller, the Hamburg dealer, still distraught. I arrived late. My motor car skidded on the ice. I saw the egg for one moment. Magnificent. Then this tragedy. I drank nothing, touched nothing. My hands shake still. His passport showed he had entered Estonia only that morning. His hotel confirmed the time of departure. When the last witness had gone, Inspector Cook looked at his notes and then at Poirot. 8 people in or near the courtyard after dinner, he summarized. All with motive, none with unbreakable alibi except possibly the servants. And they may lie for each other. The guests we may discount. They lose more by Ivanovich's death than they gain. Precisely, said Poirot. And the method, simple, crude, risky. Poison in a decanter that only the victim was certain to drink from in quantity. Someone who knew his habits intimately. Cook closed his notebook with a snap. Then tomorrow we search rooms, question again, wait for the autopsy. Tonight the house remains under guard. He hesitated, then added with the awkward respect of the young for the legendary, "You will assist?" "But of course," said Poirot benignly. "It is why I am here." Later, in the guest room, Poirot sat before the dying fire and arranged his thoughts as neatly as the objects on his dressing table. 8 suspects, 8 motives, bright and sharp as the amber that surrounded them. Yet one fact disturbed him, the Romanov egg itself. Why had the murderer not seized it in the confusion? It had lain on the floor for seconds, long enough. Unless, thought Poirot, the egg was not the prize at all, or unless the murderer dared not touch it. He turned off the light. In the darkness, the glow from the courtyard filtered through the curtains, turning the room to pale gold. Somewhere in this house, a poisoner slept, or lay awake, fearing the little Belgian with the impeccable mustaches. Poirot smiled into the darkness. Tomorrow the little gray cells would begin their work in earnest. Chapter 5. The Matter of the Amber Beads. Morning came gray and reluctant. The snow piled in drifts against the medieval windows. The house on Veni Street felt heavier, as though the amber itself had absorbed the poison and now exhaled suspicion with every golden gleam. Breakfast was a silent affair, coffee untasted, black bread crumbling untouched on Sèvres plates. The guests had been allowed to leave at dawn, under promise of discretion and availability. The household remained prisoners in velvet chains. Inspector Cook had established a temporary office in the winter salon, his constables tramping snow across ancient Persian rugs. Searches had begun at first light, drawers ransacked with official thoroughness, mattresses turned, letters steamed open and read. Nothing yet. No phial of prussic acid, no incriminating diary, only the usual litter of human unhappiness. Poirot, who disliked disorder, had retired to the smaller study overlooking the courtyard. He had requested that the suspects be sent to him one by one in the order that pleased his sense of symmetry. A fire crackled. On the desk lay the Romanov egg, returned by the police after photographs, its clouded amber seeming almost to pulse in the cold light. Lydia Ivanovich came first. She had changed morning for morning, now a gown of dove-gray wool that made her look even more ethereal. She sat without invitation, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles showed white. "You wish to know if I killed him," she said directly. Her voice was steady, but the pupils of her eyes were enormous, veronal again, or something stronger. "Madam, I wish to know the truth." "The truth?" She laughed softly, a sound like breaking ice. "Karl married me for my name. Yes, I am distantly related to the Romanovs, though the Bolsheviks left us nothing but the name. He paraded me like another piece in his collection. I was 26, he was 58. He promised security, excitement, a life among beautiful things." She glanced toward the courtyard. Instead, isolation and humiliation. Captain Tam, perhaps, offered consolation? Her head came up sharply. "Eric is a gentleman. He understood what it is to lose a world. We talked, nothing more. Karl suspected, of course. He suspected everyone." "And the Veronal?" "I take it for sleep. Last night I took rather more than usual. After the unveiling began, I felt faint and returned to my room for 20 minutes. Katya saw me." Poirot dismissed her gently. She paused at the door. "If I had wished to kill him, monsieur, I would have done it years ago." Captain Tam entered next, moving with the controlled precision of a man on parade. He stood until Poirot waved him to a chair. "You were heard to quarrel with the deceased yesterday afternoon," Poirot began, without preamble. Tam's face remained expressionless. "Ivanovich discovered certain irregularities in the accounts, bills of exchange bearing what he claimed was my forged signature. He threatened exposure." "Were they forged?" A muscle jumped in the captain's cheek. "No, but the money was used to cover debts Ivanovich himself incurred through reckless speculation. He wished a scapegoat." "Your alibi, the Swedish countess." "We discussed shipping. She is considering investment in Baltic lines." A faint, wintry smile. "She found me preferable company to her Latvian banker, I believe." Poirot studied the soldier's face. "You poured the fatal glass, I think?" Tam met his eyes steadily. "I did, from the decanter that had stood on the sideboard all evening. If I poisoned it, why hand it to him myself?" "Precisely, Capitaine. A point in your favor." Paul Ivanovich arrived smelling faintly of brandy taken against the cold. He flung himself into the chair with theatrical exhaustion. "Well, Uncle's death solves my immediate problems," he said cheerfully. "The latest will cut me off, but since he died before signing the codicil, my lawyer assures me, the previous one stands. I get rather a lot." He inspected his manicure. "Still, I didn't kill him. Too vulgar. And I was with Prince Dolgoruki, losing money I no longer needed to worry about borrowing." "You knew of the new will?" "Oh, yes. He told me yesterday with great relish. Reform, my boy, or starve." As though starvation were an option in Monte Carlo. Helena Roos came next, eyes swollen, clutching a handkerchief as though it were a shield. She sat very straight, small hands twisting in her lap. "Monsieur Ivanovich was difficult," she began, voice trembling. "But I was devoted to the collection. 5 years cataloging every piece, polishing, researching provenance. Yesterday he found a fragment of raw amber missing from his work table. Only a scrap, no larger than a fingernail. He accused me of theft, said I had been stealing for years. Had you? She flushed crimson. I borrowed it, to have made into a brooch for my mother's birthday. I intended to replace it. Poirot's eyes were kind. And after dinner? I went to my office. I was upset. I burned some personal letters. No one saw me. When she rose to leave, her reticule caught on the chair and spilled its contents: handkerchief, pencil, a small prayer book, and a string of amber beads. Prayer beads such as Catholic women use, but fashioned from amber of varying shades. One bead rolled across the carpet and stopped at Poirot's foot. He picked it up. It was darker than the rest, almost cognac-colored, with a tiny bubble of air trapped at its heart. "Curious," he murmured. Helena snatched it back, blushing furiously. "They were my mother's. Please." Fräulein Weber stumped in without knocking, knitting bag clutched like a weapon. She wasted no time. "He promised restitution after the sale," she said harshly. "All my money, gone. Now nothing. The lawyers say the estate is entangled. I am ruined. Your alibi, the Latvian lady. She admired my lace pattern. For 3/4 of an hour we discussed nothing else." The old woman's lips curled. These rich women, always pretending interest in the work of honest hands. When she opened her knitting bag to demonstrate the pattern, another string of amber beads tumbled out, similar to Helena's, but larger, more crudely polished. Poirot retrieved one that had rolled free. Ordinary Baltic amber, milky, without flaw. "Fräulein, you are fond of amber beads?" "They comfort me," she snapped, "like rosaries. Now leave me in peace." The servants were brief. Johann and Katja repeated their story of the pantry. Nothing had been found in their quarters save a pathetic hoard of sugar and coffee. Servants' perks. Finally, Herr Müller, still shaken, his honest Hamburg face pale. "I examined the egg this morning under magnification at the inspector's request," he said earnestly. "It is genuine, superb, but there is a repair. A tiny flaw in the amber has been filled with a fragment that does not quite match. A forgery, cleverly done, but to an expert." He spread his hands. "I would have exposed it tonight when I bid. The value would have fallen catastrophically." Poirot leaned forward. "You are certain?" "Absolutely. The trapped insect in the original amber is unique. The replacement fragment has only an air bubble. Amateur work, but skillful." After Müller left, Poirot sat motionless for a long time, turning the dark bead Helena had dropped between his fingers. It was warm from his hand, glowing like a coal. Then he rose and crossed to the window. In the courtyard below, the fountain had been drained. The great amber basin gaped empty, stained dark where Ivanovitch had fallen. The little gray cells stirred and began to arrange themselves in order. Someone had stolen not raw amber, but a fragment of the Romanov egg itself. Someone had repaired the damage with common amber to conceal the theft. Someone had known that Herr Müller's examination would reveal the forgery, and someone had poisoned the Kümmel to prevent that revelation. Poirot closed his fist around the bead until it bit into his palm. The circle was narrowing. Chapter 6. The Truth in the Light. The afternoon dragged toward a premature twilight, the short northern day surrendering early to cloud and snow. Inspector Cook had completed his searches. fruitless save for the discovery of a half-empty bottle of Veronal in Lydia Ivanovich's dressing table and a packet of forged bills of exchange hidden in Captain Tam's dispatch case. Motives thickened like cream, yet proof remained elusive. At 4 o'clock, Poirot sent word. Everyone was to assemble in the amber courtyard at 5. The message was delivered by Juhan with the solemnity of a funeral invitation. They gathered reluctantly, drawn by curiosity and dread. The candles had been relit. The walls glowed with their treacherous warmth, but the pedestal stood empty, and the fountain basin had been scrubbed clean, leaving only a faint shadow to mark where Ivanovich had died. Snow filtered through the glass roof in lazy specks, melting as they touched the heated amber. Inspector Cook stood to one side, notebook ready, his young face tense. The household formed a ragged semicircle, Lydia pale and composed under her drugs, Captain Tam rigid as a sentry, Paul lounging with elaborate unconcern, a cigarette trembling between his fingers, Helena Roos small and white, eyes fixed on the floor, Fräulein Weber knitting with vicious speed, the servants hovering in the shadows. Poirot entered last, neat as ever, carrying the Romanoff egg in its leather case. He placed it on the pedestal with deliberate care, then turned to face them. The candlelight flickered across his egg-shaped head and the perfect points of his mustaches. Mesdames et messieurs, he began in his precise, faintly accented French. We are met here, in this beautiful room that was Monsieur Ivanovich's pride, to unmask his killer. Inspector Cook is prepared to make an arrest. He favors, I believe, the nephew with his debts and his disinheritance. It is natural. The motives are obvious, the alibis shaky, but Hercule Poirot does not concern himself with the obvious. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Consider the crime. Prussic acid in the Kümmel decanter, crude, risky, yet effective. The poisoner relied on one thing, that Monsieur Ivanovich alone would drink the Kümmel unmixed and in quantity. Everyone else took it, if at all, diluted with soda or in tiny glasses as a digestive. Only Ivanovich drank it like vodka, in great swallows. The murderer knew his habits intimately. Now, the attempts before last night, the cut-break cable, the sawn chandelier chain, the trace of poison in the vodka, those were clever, deniable. An enemy from outside might have managed them. But last night's murder was different. It was committed by someone who could move freely in this house, who knew exactly when the unveiling would occur, who understood that the egg must never be closely examined by an expert. Regard, if you please, the egg itself. He opened the case. Light, fractured lights scattered across their faces as he held the treasure aloft. Superb, yes? Yet this morning, Herr Müller discovered a repair. A tiny flaw. Here, see the darker patch, filled with a fragment of common amber containing only an air bubble. A forgery, skillful but detectable. Had the sale proceeded, the deception would have been exposed, the egg's value ruined, the thief branded forever. Helena Roos made a small sound, half gasp, half sob. Poirot's eyes rested on her gently. Mademoiselle Roos, you have served Monsieur Ivanovich for 5 years with devotion. You catalogued his treasures, polished them, loved them perhaps more than he did. But love of beauty can become a dangerous thing. You wished a keepsake, something small, something no one would notice missing from the great Romanoff egg. a fragment no larger than a fingernail, chipped away when he left the egg on his desk one afternoon. You intended to have it made into a brooch for your mother. Harmless, you told yourself. But he noticed. He noticed everything. Yesterday he discovered the mutilation and, in his rage, accused you of theft, dismissed you. And you knew that tonight Herr Miller would examine the egg under his loupe. He would see the repair. Your forgery would be revealed. Not raw amber borrowed and replaced, but a piece of the imperial treasure itself stolen. Your name, your reputation, everything you had worked for, destroyed. Helena's hands flew to her throat. I only took a scrap. Precisely, but to conceal it you performed a delicate operation. You ground a piece of common amber to fit the flaw exactly, sealing it with heat and resin. Clever, almost perfect. Only the trapped air bubble betrayed you, where the original had an insect. You had access to poisons. Ivanovich kept scheelite and other chemicals for cleaning amber. From them, prussic acid is easily distilled. You added it to the kümmel early in the evening, when the servants were busy and the guests arriving. You knew he would toast with it at the climax. Then you waited. Paul laughed harshly. Pretty theory, but where's the proof? Poirot produced a handkerchief, small, lace-edged, initialed HR, and held it delicately between thumb and forefinger. This fell from Mademoiselle Rousse's sleeve when she knelt beside the body in the confusion. A natural gesture of compassion, but the handkerchief carries the faintest trace of oil of bitter almonds. You tested the dose, mademoiselle, did you not? On a spoon, perhaps, to be certain of its strength. A single drop remained. Helena stared at the handkerchief as though it were a snake. And finally, Poirot opened his other hand. On his palm lay the dark amber bead with its telltale bubble. This fell from your reticule yesterday. It matches exactly the repair on the egg. I removed the forgery this morning. The flaw gapes empty now. See for yourselves. He held the egg to the candlelight. There, on the lower curve, was a tiny cavity, no larger than a pinhead, yet gaping like a wound. Helena swayed. Captain Tam took an involuntary step forward, then stopped. "It is not possible," she whispered. "He should not have noticed the fragment missing. It was so small." "But he did notice," Poirot said softly. "And in his anger he would have destroyed you. You acted to save yourself. A crime of fear and wounded pride, not greed." She looked around the circle of faces, some shocked, some pitying, one or two almost relieved, and her own face crumpled. "He called me a thief," she said, voice breaking. "In front of everyone. 5 years. And he called me a thief for loving something too much. I wanted him to feel what it is to have beauty taken away forever." She began to cry, not dramatically, but with the quiet hopelessness of a child. Inspector Cook moved forward, handcuffs ready. Helena did not resist. As he led her past the pedestal, she reached out one hand toward the egg, fingers trembling in the air inches from the amber, then let it fall. The courtyard was silent except for the soft ticking of Fräulein Weber's needles, which had started again with mechanical calm. Paul lit another cigarette with fingers that shook. "Well," he said, attempting lightness, "at least the will stands now. Poor Helena. Who'd have thought the little mouse had it in her?" Lydia turned away, pressing a handkerchief to her lips. Captain Tam's face was stone. Poirot replaced the egg in its case and snapped it shut. "The egg will go to the museum at Riga, I think," he said quietly. "It belongs to history now. not to private passion. Later, when the police had taken Helena away, and the house stood echoing and empty, Poirot stood alone in the courtyard. Snow had begun to fall more thickly, blanketing the glass roof, until the amber glow softened to a diffused golden haze. Inspector Cook joined him, stamping cold from his boots. "You were right," the young man said grudgingly. "I would have arrested the nephew." Poirot smiled. "The obvious is so often misleading, mon cher. Give my compliments to your chief. You have conducted yourself with admirable thoroughness." Cook hesitated. "Will you stay for the trial?" "Alas, no. London calls, but justice here is in good hands." He buttoned his overcoat, a new, heavier one purchased that morning against the Estonian winter, and picked up his cane and walked toward the archway. At the threshold, he paused and looked back once more at the glowing walls. "Beauty," he murmured, "is a dangerous thing. It makes thieves of us all." Outside, the snow fell thick and silent on the ancient roofs of Tallinn, erasing footprints, softening edges, preparing the city for a white and blameless morning. Poirot turned up his collar and stepped into the cold,